Chapter 6: Energy, Capacity, and Responsibility. Every system operates through energy. Not only physical energy, but attention, authority, trust, capital, time, and legitimacy. These forms differ in expression, but they share a common property: they enable action. Energy determines what a system can do. Capacity determines how much it can do. Responsibility determines how that capacity is carried. Stability depends on the alignment of all three. Energy is the ability to affect outcomes. Energy is the ability to produce change. In individuals, it appears as effort, focus, and influence. In organizations, it appears as capital, authority, and coordination. In institutions, it appears as mandate, legitimacy, and enforcement power. Energy is not neutral. It creates impact wherever it flows. When energy increases, so does the system's ability to alter its environment. This expansion is often celebrated. Growth, scale, and influence are treated as unambiguous successes. They are not. Energy without corresponding capacity produces distortion. Capacity without responsibility produces instability. The presence of energy is not proof of readiness. Capacity is structural load-bearing ability. Capacity is the ability to absorb and distribute load without degradation. It is not identical to energy. Energy enables action. Capacity determines sustainability. A system may possess significant energy and limited capacity. It may act decisively, expand rapidly, and influence broadly while eroding internally. Capacity depends on structure. Clear roles, reliable feedback loops, trust relationships, accountability mechanisms, and internal coherence all contribute to capacity. When these weaken, capacity declines even as energy remains high. This mismatch is dangerous. High energy systems with low capacity fail abruptly. Responsibility as alignment mechanism. Responsibility aligns energy with capacity. It assigns load to the structures capable of bearing it. It ensures that decisions are made by those exposed to consequence. It distributes pressure internally rather than allowing it to accumulate externally. Responsibility is not moral obligation. It is structural assignment. When responsibility is clearly aligned, systems self-correct. When it is diffused, deferred, or avoided, misalignment grows. Responsibility does not disappear when unassigned. It migrates. The cost of unknown capacity. Unknown capacity creates instability. When individuals or systems possess the ability to act without clear responsibility, decisions multiply without accountability. Actions produce effects that no one is structurally required to absorb. This condition is often described as empowerment. It is more accurately described as load misplacement. Empowerment without responsibility increases activity. It does not increase stability. Over time, consequences accumulate outside the decision-making structure. Correction arrives from beyond the system's control. Scaling energy faster than capacity. Modern systems excel at increasing energy. Technology amplifies reach. Capital accelerates expansion. Communication scales influence. Authority extends across domains. Capacity rarely scales at the same rate. Structures designed for smaller loads are asked to carry larger ones. Feedback loops lengthen. Decision makers become insulated from consequence. Responsibility diffuses across layers. The system appears successful. Its foundations weaken. This pattern repeats across contexts because energy growth is visible and rewarded, while capacity erosion is gradual and often invisible. Why responsibility is often avoided. Responsibility concentrates exposure. It requires bearing consequence. It demands accountability for outcomes beyond intention. It limits plausible deniability. As systems grow, responsibility becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Delegation becomes attractive. Diffusion becomes normal. Ambiguity becomes protective. Avoiding responsibility feels like reducing risk. It increases it. Unknown responsibility accumulates a systemic pressure. When correction arrives, it is no longer localized. Authority without capacity. Authority grants the right to decide. Capacity determines the ability to absorb the impact of those decisions. When authority exceeds capacity, decisions generate instability. When capacity exceeds authority, systems stagnate. Stable systems align authority with capacity. Unstable systems separate them. This separation produces familiar symptoms, decisions made far from consequence, execution carried by those without authority, accountability displaced downward or outward. The system functions, but coherence erodes. Responsibility and consequence. Responsibility links decision to consequence. When this link weakens, feedback degrades. Decisions are evaluated by intention, compliance, or narrative rather than outcome. This evaluation feels fair. It is structurally corrosive. Systems that evaluate decisions without reference to consequence lose the ability to learn. They repeat patterns without recalibration. Responsibility restores feedback by ensuring that impact remains visible. Energy concentration and fragility. Concentrating energy increases efficiency. It also increases fragility. Centralized systems act quickly. They coordinate effectively. They scale impact. They also create single points of failure. When energy concentrates without distributed responsibility, failure propagates rapidly. Correction becomes system-wide rather than localized. Distributed responsibility absorbs shock. Concentrated energy amplifies it. The illusion of control. Control often substitutes for capacity. When systems sense misalignment, they increase oversight, enforcement, and intervention. Control suppresses symptoms. It does not restore structural integrity. Control creates compliance. Capacity creates resilience. Systems that rely on control without rebuilding capacity become brittle. They require increasing intervention to maintain stability. This dependency escalates until collapse or reset occurs. When this is ignored, when energy outpaces capacity and responsibility is diffused, systems experience correction as crisis. Outcomes appear disproportionate. Responses feel excessive. Pressure seems external. In reality, the system is encountering the accumulated cost of misalignment. Responsibility as load distribution. Responsibility distributes load across a system. It prevents concentration. It ensures that stress is absorbed incrementally rather than explosively. It aligns incentives with outcomes. This distribution is not always efficient. It is stabilizing. Systems that prioritize efficiency over responsibility often achieve short-term gains. They sacrifice long-term endurance. Why capacity declines quietly. Capacity erosion is rarely dramatic. It appears as delayed response, communication breakdown, trust decay, and increasing exception handling. These signals are often treated as operational issues rather than structural warnings. Because energy remains high, decline is misinterpreted as temporary friction. Capacity continues to erode until it can no longer carry existing load. At that point, even minor disturbances trigger collapse. The relationship between responsibility and legitimacy. Legitimacy emerges when responsibility is visibly owned. When decisions are made by those who bear consequence, trust develops. When responsibility is deflected, legitimacy erodes. This erosion is often subtle. The system continues to function. Compliance persists. But trust thins. When correction arrives, legitimacy determines whether adaptation or rupture follows. Capacity is not infinite. Systems often behave as though capacity can be expanded indefinitely. It cannot. Capacity depends on human attention, trust, coherence, and structural integrity. These are finite and degrade under sustained overload. Ignoring capacity limits leads systems to mistake resilience for immunity. They discover the difference too late. Energy, capacity, and moral confusion. Systems often interpret capacity failure as moral failure. They attribute breakdown to bad actors, insufficient commitment, or lack of belief. This framing deflects attention from structural misalignment. Moralization delays correction. Capacity failure requires redesign, not condemnation. Closing constitutional statement. Energy enables action. Capacity sustains it. Responsibility aligns the two. When energy grows without capacity, systems become fragile. When capacity exists without responsibility, systems stagnate. When responsibility is diffused, correction becomes unavoidable. Stability is not achieved by increasing power. It is achieved by aligning energy, capacity, and responsibility. End of chapter 6.